let's start off by an issue that is not controversial on YouTube at all. Every time we discuss the war in Ukraine, I am deemed a crazy, radical, America First isolationist. Now, that is a label I don't find to be particularly insulting. In fact, I wear that proudly. But if you're going to call me crazy, I think it's fair to at least compare my ideas side by side with your ideas. I mean, if you're going to call me crazy, then let's compare what I'm saying versus what you are saying. So, what I have advocated for in regards to this conflict is that instead of sending endless taxpayer dollars to Ukraine with no discernible end goal, right? You ask these people, why are we sending this money? They can't really actually tell you. My proposal is that we actually step in now and try to negotiate or help negotiate a diplomatic peace treaty, right? A peaceful solution instead of continuing to fuel endless war for the sake of the military-industrial complex. Now, for doing so, I am labeled pro-Putin. I am told that if I want to broker any type of peace between the two nations, then I must be a Putin apologist. I may even be a Russian asset, which, of course, is not true at all. So again, let's put my ideas side by side with the ideas of the war hawks, and that doesn't just mean Biden, obviously. That means the war hawks on both sides. So let's put my ideas side by side with the liberals, obviously, but also the neocons, also kind of the establishment GOP, just the entire globalist uniparty in Washington. Let's compare ideas because, again, they want to call us the crazy radicals. So let me get into my ideas, and then we'll compare it to what the other side is saying about this. So let me tell you why I advocate for this very radical far-right idea known as peace in Eastern Europe, okay? So the way I see it right now, pragmatically speaking, this war is effectively in a stalemate, right? Russia has failed in its goal to blitzkrieg all of Ukraine, right? As you saw last year, they failed to take Kyiv. And so to the Ukrainians' credit, if the fear was, oh, they're going to topple Ukraine immediately, that obviously has not happened. And to Ukraine's credit again, I think they've actually done a pretty good job sticking up for themselves, right? But that's why I further would say, you know, even to take a moderate position here, they're actually in a good negotiating position right now because we are stuck in this stalemate. And so to me, the end outcome of this war seems obvious and inevitable, which is that, let's be honest, everyone knows this is how the war is going to end. Russia will get to keep Crimea. Probably they'll annex some parts of the eastern regions, but most of Ukraine will get to keep its territorial sovereignty intact. Can we be honest? Everyone knows that's how this war is going to end, right? Ukraine will probably get to keep a lot of its country. Russia will keep Crimea. Maybe some of the eastern regions get annexed by Russia. Everyone on the planet with any degree of common sense or eyes knows that that is the end outcome of the war, and that like, regardless of whether it ends tomorrow or if we keep this dragging on for several more years, let's all be honest, that's more likely than not how the war is going to end. The reason I say we ought to step in and broker peace is that I think by fueling the war, we're only delaying the inevitable, and in the process of delaying the inevitable, we are letting a bunch of people die for what? Inches of territory? A stalemate? Why? What's the point of that? That's brutal, that's savage, that's unnecessary. And even from a completely practical perspective, not even caring about, you know, the humanitarian aspect of this, it's a lot of American tax dollars, right? So we can keep paying billions of more dollars to get the same outcome, or we can just say, okay, well, why don't both sides try to sue for peace here, which, again, seems like a very realistic outcome. Of course, the Biden administration thinks the opposite. Biden thinks that we have to continue to fund this war with billions of American tax dollars. And privately, on top of that, you have a lot of sources alleging that Biden officials have actually actively told Ukrainian officials not to negotiate, right? And so this is the rumor you've been hearing from inside DC for the past year or so, which is that since March, basically since the start of this conflict, there has been a door open for peace. And Biden and his officials have actively been stepping into the Ukrainian government and saying, do not negotiate, keep up the war, keep up the fight. And again, for what? To keep wasting more money and lives on the same thing that's probably bound to happen anyway? I would even go further and say that what I am proposing in many ways is a best possible solution for Ukraine. Because don't get me wrong, I did say that I think this is going to happen anyway, and I think this is the most likely scenario. But let's also be clear about this, because people always say, oh, you just want to surrender Ukraine to Russia. Well, there is a worst case scenario here. Okay? And the worst case scenario is that Russia, who, as you've seen with their military currently, they don't fully have their act together. The worst case scenario for Ukraine is that Russia actually does end up getting its act together, right? The worst case scenario is where they, obviously you've seen a lot of incompetence and ill preparedness on Russia's part, which is part of why Ukraine is actually putting up a good fight. But the numbers don't lie. Russia has more manpower. Russia has more resources than Ukraine. And it's only a matter of time. Not only do the numbers not lie, but history does not lie, folks. Think back to World War II. And think back to a lot of other cases in Russian history. As we famously know, Russia started off World War II famously incompetent, under-industrialized, and slow to act at the start of the war. This is why Germany made such significant strides in the early days of Operation Barbarossa on the Eastern Front. Sound familiar? This seems to be the story of Russian history, right? They're a very slow and kind of incompetent country to mobilize at first. It's a big country after all, but then what happened over time? What happened over time was that the Russians slowly started to figure things out, right? They got the war machine turning properly. They obviously had the manpower to overwhelm the Germans. And by the end of the war, the once backwater and incompetent Soviet Union was a highly efficient and deadly military force that actually ended up reaching Berlin before we did, and was obviously, as you know from world history, a very formidable threat to the Western Allies for another 5 decades. I would further remind our audience that many of these same criticisms and mockery that is made of Russia today was also said at the start of World War II. So what do we say about Russia today? Oh, it's like a third world country. Oh, their technology is outdated. Oh, they're big, but they're not really modernized, right? Well, that's what people were saying about the Soviet Union in 1939, right? They were seen by the West as a backwater, unindustrialized, basically third world nation. The Soviet military was regarded as a joke with a lot of outdated technology. Does that line sound familiar? Oh, their technology is outdated. Well, what started to happen? They started producing stuff. They started kind of getting back in the game on that front. Okay? Does this all sound familiar to you? Of course, modern historians, if you kind of hear about World War II, will lambast like Hitler's, for his strategically stupid decision to invade Russia. This is what you very often hear. Oh, Hitler was stupid to invade Russia, etc. But it should be, and perhaps that's true, but it should also be noted that the Western Allies thought similar things of the Soviet Union. Churchill and the British intelligence back then estimated that the USSR would collapse within a few months of the war due to the nation's, again, backwater incompetence. And obviously, you know what really happened in world history. What happened? Russia got its act together, and next thing you knew, the post-World War II Soviet Union, eventually a nuclear power, all of that stuff was born. Does this all sound familiar to you? It should. So now my question is, you want to talk about, oh, well, Vince, you just want to surrender Ukraine to Russia. Well, let me turn that back on you, because the longer you keep up, I'm saying, well, the best thing you could get right now is like a peace deal for both sides, right? Peace is good. But again, if you continue up this fight, yeah, Russia may collapse, Putin may fall, which is the same thing they said about Stalin. But also history teaches us very often it's also possible in Russia that they could actually, get their act together, figure things out. And next thing you know, you have an actually like strong Russia that Ukraine, no matter how much money you send them, is going to be able to stop. Okay. Let me point that out to you. There is a scenario here where Russia finally figures out and their army just goes roughshod on Ukraine, and then they actually are capable of taking over more of Eastern Europe, which they probably are not right now. Is that what you want to happen? Let's send billions more to Ukraine. Is that what you want to happen? Or would you rather end the war now, largely kind of in like a humiliating way on the Russians' part, because they would have demonstrated to the world they're a bit of a weaker military force than they thought, and negotiate peace before the Russian war machine figures out how to start turning? Again, I still think that the most likely scenario is just this partition, right? Obviously. But there is absolutely, the longer you go, the higher the risk gets that Russia actually starts to get its act together. And so I would say that to the neocons. But since you disagree with my solution, to the war hawks, the neolibs, the neocons, let's hear your solution. Because in my opinion, I laid out a coherent, realistic, specific strategy and outcome. So what's yours? What is your strategy? What's your realistic outcome? What are you trying to pursue in Ukraine? Do you notice how the Ukraine money mongerers can never lay out a coherent explanation for what they're actually trying to do in Ukraine? They can never explain what their strategic goal is. They can never explain their objective. They never justify why they're sending over these billions of dollars to fund this globalist agenda, other than, oh, well, Putin is bad, Putin bad, Putin bad. Oh, Putin is a dictator, democracy, this and that. Okay, Putin being bad and democracy, those are not reasons. Those are not objectives. Okay, they're not strategic objectives, dork. Okay, you don't go to war saying defend democracy. You lay out, okay, here's what we're trying to. They don't have one. They don't have a strategy at all. We can't just write blank checks to nations with a subline, Putin bad, here's $80 billion. Like, what's actually the point? What are you trying to achieve? You notice how they never have the answer to this question, and when you actually corner them, sometimes they will give you the real answer, and the real answer I have heard is incredibly dumb and unrealistic, which is basically to drive Russia out of all Ukrainian territory, including Crimea. You've probably heard this before. Like, just kick all the Russians out. They won't take an inch of land and give back Crimea. And it's like, yeah, because that's a realistic solution, really. You're going to kick Russia not just out of what they've invaded. You're going to kick them out of Crimea too, and then you're going to say, we're not going to end the war until that happens? That's never going to happen. That's delusional and insane. You're not going to drive Russia back to its pre-2014 borders. This is a stupid idea that there's no way Ukraine can even get that done. And they know this. They know it's a very unrealistic and unachievable goal. They know they are basically just setting money and lives on fire for basically no reason. I don't think they care. And folks, those are the people that call us the America Firsters, the people who are kind of asking very basic level questions about what we're doing and why we're doing it here. Those are the people that call us crazy. They say, for not supporting our proxy war, you are a lunatic, but they can't actually explain why they're doing the proxy war to begin with. Oh, let me check the time. What time is it? It's time for you to get a watch, first of all. And secondly, it is time for you to like and subscribe to the channel. So, ladies and gentlemen, be sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe if you are new, and check out the full Vince Dao show live every weeknight at 8 p.m. Eastern time. It is the premier political show on the American right. This is so true. This is so true. It's time for you to go watch it. Check us out, 8 p.m. Eastern time every weeknight.